Hello, eighth grade girls. We are reading the last section of chapter 11 today, and we're going to be talking about some reform movements that took place during this time period we've been covering. Last time we talked a lot about missions in the United States and how that expanded our borders. Those who were inspired to go past just the United States and the Native Americans to other countries and to start mission organizations and foundations, and the gospel was really spread wide across the world during this time period from America. So from there, we're going to go into talking about some reform movements in addition to the Second Great Awakening and the Reformation and all of that. And so we're on page 205, Reform Movements. The spiritual revivals during the first half of the 19th century also produced important social reforms. The Temperance Crusade. Raising the Christian conscience. In his many city revivals, Charles Finney forcefully preached against drunkenness, the most widespread evil of its time. Camp meetings and other Christian ministries also raised a Christian conscience against liquor. Wives and children of alcoholics often went without food and clothing when paychecks were spent at the local bar. Countless other people were injured by brawls or accidents due to drunken behavior. One of the earliest groups organized to fight the liquor business was the Total Abstinence Society, organized in 1804 at the Shenandoah Valley. This group insisted that all of its members sign a written statement to abstain from alcohol. In the same year, the Brethren, or Dunkards, became one of the first church groups to rule that its members could not sell alcohol, including wine. By 1833, more than 5,000 local temperance societies had been organized in the United States. Churches fought against liquor dealers who wanted to sell alcohol to local neighborhoods. Methodists, Baptists, Presbyterians, and African Methodist Episcopals churches all played important roles in the battle against alcohol. The American Temperance Union united these groups and distributed tracts warning against strong drink. Maine was the first state to outlaw the use of liquor in 1846. So that term for that is called a dry state. So that means it is illegal to sell alcohol in that state. Within 10 years, 13 states in the North and West had adopted similar laws. In response to the efforts of American missionaries, King Kamehameha of Hawaii outlawed the sale of liquor on his island as well. Temperance among the American Indians. Temperance work among the Indians started early in the 19th century. Chief Little Turtle of the Miami Indians in the Ohio River Valley influenced President Thomas Jefferson to ask the Ohio legislature to stop the sale of liquor to Indians. In the Northeast, the Indian leader Handsome Lake organized a large Iroquois nation to combat the liquor trade among the Indians. 3 Midwestern tribes, Shawnee, Seneca, and Wyandots, met in Ohio to denounce alcohol. As a result, drunkenness almost disappeared in the region. As governor of the Northwest Territory, William Henry Harrison warned against the violent acts committed by persons under the influence of alcohol on the frontier. Black Hawk War of 1832 had caused much suffering in the Midwest, and liquor was largely to blame for this Indian violence against white settlers. Governor Harrison recommended a stop to all liquor sales to Indians in the Northwest Territory. In 1843, representatives of the Cherokee, Creek, and Osage entered into a solemn anti-liquor compact. The Cherokee Temperance Society sent out Indian evangelists to preach against alcohol. In the 1850s, the Chickasaw and the Choctaw nations did the same. Mission activity among the Indian tribes continued to stress abstinence from alcohol. The message of temperance was taught, preached, and implemented in many tribal councils, schools, and churches. Lincoln takes a stand against alcohol. Although many people in the frontier state of Illinois opposed the liquor trade, temperance remained an uphill battle. In 1832, Abraham Lincoln, a candidate for the seat in the Illinois House of Representatives, addressed an audience in Springfield, Illinois, at a campaign rally. Standing before his audience, Lincoln spoke against the sale and drinking of alcohol with conviction and power. Whether or not the world would be vastly benefited by a total and final banishment from all intoxicating drinks seems to me not now an open question. 3/4 of mankind confess the affirmative with their tongues, and I believe the rest acknowledge it with their hearts. When there shall be neither a slave nor a drunkard on earth, how proud the title of the land which may truly claim to be the birthplace of both of these revolutions that shall be ended in that victory. How nobly distinguished that people who shall have planted and nurtured to maturity both the political and moral freedom of their species. Thus, Lincoln publicly proclaimed his belief in temperance. He compared the slavery of alcohol addiction to the slavery experienced by many Black people at this time. Lincoln opposed the drinking and selling of alcohol for the rest of his life. When he became president, he returned unopened all wine and liquor bottles sent to him as gifts. McGuffey has the last word. William McGuffey, the author of the famous McGuffey's Readers, so firmly opposed alcoholic drink that he included in his school readers a strong passage against the licensing of liquor. Licensed to do thy neighbor harm, licensed to kindle hate and strife, licensed to nerve the robber's arm, licensed to whet the murderer's knife, licensed like a spider for a fly, to spread thy nets for man thy pry, to mock his struggles, crush his soul, then cast his worthless form away. Cool. Those are pretty powerful words. All right, so during this time period of Reformation or reform, we see the first act of reform is temperance. The temperance movement. Okay, so many unions were created to abolish the use and sales of alcohol. This spread to states, the frontier in the Northwest Territory, and among many Native American tribes. So these people recognized the damage that alcohol can do when used irresponsibly. So these people saw the damage caused by using alcohol irresponsibly. And wanted to do away with it. Okay, so that's the temperance movement. Temperance meaning against the sale, the drinking, the acceptance of alcohol. All right, going on to the next form of reform, we have women and reform. So if you think of women up to this point in history, women are mostly uneducated housewives or servants. Their job is to be the host of your house, to keep the house, to raise children, That was really the job of a woman. A woman did not have any say in government. A woman did not have any voting rights. They were under the submission of their husbands in all things. And so we see a reform here in women's social standing and what their place is in society and government. So women and reform. Between the 1800s and the Civil War, many American women took part in a reform movement. In 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, 1815 to 1902, and Lucretia Mott, 1793 to 1880, helped organize the first Women's Right Convention on July 19, 1848, at Seneca Falls, New York. Susan B. Anthony joined the women's right movement in 1851, lecturing in many of the northern states. Stanton, Mott, and Anthony were especially interested in women's suffrage, or the right to vote. Although most American women did not care to be politically active as leaders in the women's right movement, many supported the temperance movement. So again, going back to the ban of alcohol. By gaining the right to vote, they hoped to influence the government to prohibit the sale and consumption of alcoholic beverages. The abolition or anti-slavery movement also included many women. Isabella Baumfree, a former slave from New York, lectured against slavery under the name of Sojourner Truth. She worked closely with Frederick Douglass and other abolitionists. So women at this point were saying, these are some big ticket items that we have an opinion on as well. Not to be stereotypical, but most of the time during this time, alcoholics or those who did not use alcohol responsibly were men. And so when a man got his paycheck, a lot of times he would just go right down, not all men, but alcoholics, would go right down to the local bar or saloon and waste their whole paycheck, which would damage the livelihood of their entire family. And also being drunk or under the influence caused many instances of domestic violence and abuse. And so women were saying, if we had a right to vote and we could vote against alcohol, if we could vote towards temperance, then our husbands or the men in society won't be able to have access to alcohol, which would drastically change their family's life. And so this was a really important thing to them, to be able to have a say, to have a word, rather than the men who are the slave owners, the men who are the ones who are doing most of the drinking. So they're not the only ones who have a vote. Women are also being affected by the effects of alcohol. They're being affected by slavery. They're being affected by everything the government's putting in place. And so therefore women should have a say in what that looks like. And so this is what they were fighting for. So the women's movement, we have women like Stanton, Mott, and Anthony were leaders in the women's movement. They wanted women to have the ability to vote. Many were in favor of temperance. There we go. And abolition. Great. All right, the next section we have is Christian compassion. Sunday school ministries. Sunday school ministries. Church groups and larger Christian organizations reached out to the less fortunate in their communities. In 1793, a Black woman named Catherine Katie Ferguson started New York City's first Sunday school program. For over 40 years, she taught children of all races about God and the Bible, as well as reading and writing. She also cared for children from poor and troubled families and helped when necessary, to place children in good homes that could better meet their needs. In 1815, the First Baptist Church of Philadelphia established the first Sunday school in America that taught only religious subjects. So not school subjects as well, but just about the Bible. Hospitals and shelters. Dorothea L. Dix did much to improve the treatment of the mentally ill, who were often kept in prison-like cells, chained and even whipped. Others worked to improve prison conditions. Public hospitals and mission shelters began to appear in some cities. But most charitable activities were carried on by groups in local churches. Okay, so we have the Sunday school ministry beginning. There we go. So Sunday school ministry in churches was created for youth. Hospitals and shelters were also improved and focused on the treatment of the mentally ill. Unfortunately, at this time, there wasn't a lot of education on what mental illness actually looked like. If you did not have a physical disability or physical disease, then it was hard to articulate why those who had mental illnesses behaved the way that they behaved. They didn't understand what was going on inside their heads that really is a medical condition. Once that was discovered and more research was done on that, there was a much better understanding of how to best care for people with mental illness. And so shelters and hospitals were improved, and most of these groups, most of these organizations were run by local churches. So this was an option for the church of this time to be the hands and feet of God and to really be on the front lines of caring for the needs of these people with mental illness, but also sharing the gospel with them. All right, so hospitals and shelters were also improved and focused on the treatment of mentally ill. And most centers of care were run by church groups. All right, a summary of the impact of the Second Great Awakening. As the Second Great Awakening continued, churches cooperated in supporting missionaries on the frontiers, to cities and foreign mission fields. Christians from many denominations reached out to help people, feeding and clothing the poor, helping immigrants settle and find work, teaching the American Indians to adapt, to their changing world, and speaking out against slavery. The revival and restoration of people, families, and ethnic groups was the fruit of individual men and women moved to action by their Christian faith. So rather than being judgmental of those around them who thought differently, they had compassion, as God teaches us to have compassion. And that really changed our nation. It opened up doorways to conversations about God and about the gospel. It opened up opportunities to talk about how does God call us to live as those who follow him, even for the very well-established Christians that were there. It was so amazingly important for them to be able to connect with the people and make a restoration of this nation in this changing world, to make it better. And we see this also with the women's movement as they move forward into having the ability to have a voice. And thankfully, they progressed until they won. And women today have just as many rights as men do when it comes to voting, when it comes to being in a position of government, which was not even heard of at this time, and really holding positions as men do as equals. And so because of the work of these women who fought for something as small and important as voting. All right, some questions to answer today in your packet, and this is the last section for this chapter. First one, To what did Lincoln compare dependence on the bottle? So he compared it to so dependence on the bottle, meaning when you're an alcoholic, what are you a slave to? Okay, and who does that also parallel to? Who does that compare to? Number 2, name 2 women who helped organize the first women's rights convention. 3, who started New York City's first Sunday school program? 4, before local charities and hospitals appears, who helped the poor, sick, and homeless? 5, who founded the first settlement house in New York City, and what was it called? See if you can go back and find that. And some things to identify. American Temperance Union, Chief Little Turtle, Handsome Lake, Cherokee Temperance Society, Susan B. Anthony, suffrage, abolition, Sojourner Truth, and Dorothea Dix. So go back through your book and answer those questions. There are a couple videos that I had sent to your parents that go into a little bit more detail, some of the topics we read about in this chapter today. So feel free to go ahead and read that. And when you are done answering the questions, finish up any other work that you have that you didn't finish in this chapter, because we will be moving on to chapter 12 for next week, just for 2 days. And then that is it for the year, girls. So great job, and I will see you next time.